What's going on, guys? Junior's Fishing Company with a deer hair and Arctic goat jig today. So I have this, I buy a bunch of VMC jigs, a bunch of clam jigs, a bunch of jigs, pretty standard jigs like that, and I paint them different colors. This one is just a standard white, and then I put some 7mm living eyes on there. I think the ice, and then I dipped it a few times with the eyes on it. I dipped it in water-based head cement, give it some gloss and add some durability. What I'm going to do, the body is going to be all white. I'm using red thread. Maybe that red thread will show a little tiny bit, especially in the collar, it for sure will. And then I've got some Arctic goat that's gray, white, and blue, and that's going to be my tail. And this Arctic goat is super long, so I'm just picking out all of these. I mean, I could restack them too, but this is going to be plenty thick anyway. I want this bait to be, this is a really long shank, this VMC jig. It's a really thin hook. You can see, I mean, it's really thin, but it's really long, so I've got plenty of room. I almost put a rattle on here, but rattles and Arctic goat, they don't really like each other. It would just end up leaving a bump there, and I don't want that. So usually if I tie a rattle on, I'll leave a ton of room, and then I'll just do hair right up at the top, just so it impacts it a little bit less. That's probably thinking too hard, but that's just the way it goes. So I want this, again, I want this to be around 5 inches, maybe a little bit longer. This mats down, so this jig is going to swim a lot smaller than it's going to look. So that's why I want it to be a little bit longer in that regard. And again, I have a really long shank anyway. This is just 210 red, so I want this bait to be about 5 inches, and I can just get some of those longer ones out again. And this is a really thick, it's a lot of Arctic goat. And so I need to take, I'm going to add a little bit more on my right side than I normally would, just so I can cinch it down really well. And it's going to want to roll, because again, these jigs are so thin, which is fine, it's whatever. So I'm not going to really feed that around my hook. I'll show you in just a second. I've got just a sliver of that red thread on the shank showing. I don't want to comb this back and forth on the hook. I'm just going to leave it as is, just to try and prevent that stuff from getting too caught up in my hook. And I'm going to put down some super glue. Maybe I'll put down some head cement. The head cement's thinner, and so it'll get absorbed to my hook shank maybe a little bit more easily. It's not obviously going to be as sticky, but it'll kind of get all in there. I just want it to stay. So the flash I'm going to put, I'm not going to put it in now, I'm just thinking about it, is Moonlight Holographic Flashabou. So I'm going to add my first stack of hair, and these are just thin stacks. This is going to be, it's not going to be a huge puffy bait. This is going to be a longer, thinner bait. Kind of a starving bait fish, if you will. A lot of little thin patterns, or just super thick. I mean, like a 3-inch bluegill is as wide as it is long almost. So I'm not going to go super far down. I want plenty of room on that tail, but that tail is going to be razor thin. So I don't want to leave too much of a tail, because then half this bait is going to be needle thin, and then the rest of it will be thicker. So it's kind of that balance. Get that pushed around. Again, this is a really thin. This is not a lot of bucktail. Get that combed out, separate those hairs so that when I go to twist this, I can get some of those hairs on the other side. This is a jig hook, like a lot of jigs. It's going to swim like this, so you want to make sure that when you're tying this, that what you think is the bottom is actually the top, that it's getting all the stuff that it needs to be a part of the action. So now I can just get this cinched down really well. And I'll add my flash on the next one. Right here. Again, just a really thin slice of bucktail, because this is going to be a super thin bait. My last stack's a little bit thicker, just because I always want a thicker head. That's just how I kind of do it. But these are pretty thin. So I'm going to get this down, and I'm going to run out of room. I should have started farther behind, but we'll make it work. Get that spun around. And there really shouldn't be a ton of flare in any of this. I didn't necessarily trim this from the bottom or the very top, just kind of in the middle of the tail. There might be a little bit of flare in here, but you can kind of see through it, right? So now I can add my Moonlight holographic flashabou. This is just kind of a blend of like black and silver, a little opal. Some of these are stuck together. Just comb them out. And I'm going to have this go back pretty far into my tail. These just feel weird, and there's quite a bit of it in here. Maybe I'll take out a little bit. So I'm going to put that right there, and I want it to go, taper this out a little bit more. I want it to go pretty far down there. I'm going to have not a lot of waste, but I'm not going to use all of this. I don't know how long this standard holographic flashabou is, but I don't quite need all of it. So I'll get a couple wraps on there. And I gotta be careful, I'm running pretty low on thread. But I've got a new spool locked and loaded, so. Actually, it's not locked and loaded, it's sitting right next to me though. So I'll get that ready, and then I'm gonna flip this. And this is what is gonna be the top of my bait. Maybe go a little bit farther back than I did with the bottom. Get that pushed on top. Always want your comb. Comb one side, comb the other. Get that pushed as 360 as you can, really. Doesn't have to be perfect though. Then I'm not going to use any of this last stuff. You could fold this back if you want a really flashy bait, but I mean, I'm really not too concerned about that. You can add as much flash as you want. So this last stack, again, it's going to probably be my thickest. It's going to have some trapped air in it. I want to make sure that all of these butts are as even as I can get them. And I can take out, I mean, there's usually just a couple really long stragglers that don't want to, and you can leave those in for sure. So I'm going to get all of this tightly wrapped down. I'm going to come up right by my head and I'll cord up my thread. Boy, I think I'm gonna run out of thread. And I want it to be a little bit shorter, but not a ton. Then my other stacks, and I'm gonna come right here. Two good wraps. Not a ton of pressure, because I don't want it to super flare on me yet. Comb that out. Again, you want to make sure that you've got full coverage on this because it is a jig hook. And then if there's any flare, you can add it now. But you really don't need it a ton. So now I'll get this wrapped up towards my head to make sure that all of these get cinched down. And as I put that pressure, these butts are going to flare too. And that's all right. Get right up on my head. Get my trusty razor blade, and we'll trim it. White, little bit of gray, and blue. Kind of a classic shadish pattern. There's no black in it, but there's just going to be a hint of gray and blue in this tail. This white will cover up most of that blue, but there's just enough in that tail. There will be a little bit that shows through, and I don't know if any of that red thread's going to show through or not. I don't think it's gonna. But it's got a little red thread collar anyway. It looks dark right now because I put some head cement on, but when that dries, it'll add some gloss to it. But this is one of my favorite patterns, whether it's a spinnerbait, a swim jig, a chatterbait, standard jig like this one. White with a little blue, some flash, a little bit of red. It's kind of just a go-to for me. This will be one of the first jigs I throw, fishing new water or something like that, or just a search bait or something like that. So all white. White just never fails. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment below. Stuff you want to see. Junior's Fishing Company. Check out the page. We'll see you in the next one.